thanks for the invite and having us here today. I'm involved in the DSL as well, as Jim mentioned, and hopefully in some of what we'd show today, if there is something that piques your interest, I could be available for consultation and such on any project that you might have an interest in. As Jim mentioned, they do have the fellowship program, of course, which the deadline is coming up
the 15th of February.
15th of February. So I think we're going to be gearing up for that process of reviewing proposals and such. So if there is something that piques your interest, please let me know. And we'll have some time, as Jim mentioned, afterwards to talk. But I can, just through email, you can just find me too. So the lab's been around for over 10 years. We've had different homes through the university. We started off during the Center for Media Design days, and for a while reported to the provost office directly, then we reported to IT for a while. Now we're in the College of Architecture and Planning. So, and we're here today with, I think we have, 4, potentially 5 of our staff, who I'll introduce later as well. So, but we're an interdisciplinary group. I myself am an artist, so we're primarily interested in design, let's say. But people come from all sort of walks of life in terms of discipline in our unit, and we collaborate with faculty and content experts internationally from across sciences, arts, and humanities. And so today what I'll do is I'll give you a glimpse of some of that, and I'll do it through what I always think is the best way to show the work is sort of by showing the work. So instead of doing PowerPoint, I'll show you video, and you get a better sense of what some of this stuff is. A lot of it now is emergent. We're more familiar with things like virtual reality because of Google goggles and Oculus Rift and things like that. But still, not a lot of us have seen that or have had access to that. So we'll show you what we do. And our URL is just idealab.org, and you can go there, and there are all sorts of projects to look at. So, but let me jump in here to video. Now I'll just talk under this. We won't play audio or anything. So, let's see. We work a lot with archaeology and bringing the past to life. You could think of it kind of as a virtual field trip to a certain extent. You can bring either single user or multi-user groups into the simulated past and what? Oh. Into the simulated past, and typically we build those out as multi-user environments. So you might think of things like World of Warcraft or Second Life, or just kind of some kind of multiplayer game. This particular example here is from work we did with the History Channel. They've come in twice now to work with us. We ended up having a niche within solar and celestial alignments within archaeology. So we developed a simulation process to accurately position the sun and moon and visible planets for ancient monuments. And so we do quite a bit of that now. This is David here, who will be showing some of the head-mounted display work here. These are prototypes for Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. The particular exhibit is called Milestones of Flight. So it's finding ways to use again, this emergent 3D technology and immersive head-mounted display technology to explore museum objects in different ways. So here, we're particularly thinking about kids and sort of gamifying and giving people a first-person perspective, actually flying the Wright Flyer or the X-15 in simulated environments. At the same time, learning. So there's still teachable moments, but they aid in the visitor interpretation. So we do work experience. So we do work a lot with museums on that. Obviously, any object in the museum is out of context by default. It was never supposed to be in a museum, really, unless it's a handrail or something like that. So we try to reconnect it to its original context. Here we're back to History Channel work. Again, archaeologists. We've worked a lot with ancient Rome. And so this is really exploring, again, celestial alignments within several sites in Rome. So it's looking at Hadrian's Villa in this case, but there's also other sun calendar sites and such. And those projects have been done in consultation with sometimes up to a dozen scholars. So people looking at costume and custom and landscape architecture and art and And a lot of these projects too connect to a very rich archive or database too. So a lot of times we use the 3D environment as a portal to get into data and information. So spatializing those experiences. This is a touch piece, which I don't think we have here today. But it was designed for mobile. And that particular piece was a little thought about people that are queued up to go into a planetarium, sort of, biding their time. It was, again, kind of a learning moment potentially. So we had a touch experience for the Boston Museum of Science, and they could click and learn about different planets, the moons of Jupiter in this case, is the demo. Here's something that's more purely a simulation. So sometimes we're working with data and not really worried about the aesthetics of it, and often in more of a discovery mode, like this project, that is the case. So here it is again about celestial alignments. So we're looking more specifically at the shadowing, and obviously to do that, something like an architect's white model is a good mode to do that. So we primarily built the whole thing in this white model mode. But there's lots and lots of user interface and depth to this. So we pulled data from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory to position all the virtual celestial objects. Here's David again. This time he's in Chichen Itza, so in the ball court, enjoying himself. But this is a cool experiment for us, because the cool thing here for us is that he's networking, if you see his head movement, back into the environment. So that you see the avatar looking where he looks. There's a little bit of latency there, you see, but that's pretty cool, because then if you're in there in a multiplayer mode, you can see where somebody's looking. They're like, hey, look at this. And you can look over at their avatar and see what they're looking at. So we're developing those processes. There's Chichen Itza in different times of day and rain or not. Again, working with archaeologists, looking at different surveys of a site, building an interface to scrub through time, so you can go through the different phases of the monuments construction, or kind of de-evolution over time. Here's an example, laser scanning an object, a museum object again, but reestablishing, and this one happens to exist in our museum, but again, never supposed to really being in a museum, of course. It was an object you would go to on a pilgrimage to. So we reestablished that context so the museum visitor could understand that. Let me switch over to something else here. Back into Rome. This time it is a multi-user environment, so you can bring a group of students back into this site. So this is, let's say, an online experience. This particular example uses a downloadable executable, so it's not like it sits on a web page. So in both these cases, they're two different sites in two different environments, but with similar goals. This is Hadrian's Villa, and the main unique feature of this, I would say, from a scholarship side, in addition to the celestial studies, which were used for discovery. We've discovered several unknown alignments through using these tools, because you can just very quickly and accurately dial up alignments and check it out. Say, oh, on so-and-so's birthday, is there an alignment if I stand here and look at this thing? It's like, no. And then you can go and check out the next site. But a strength of this project was the professor who was the PI on the grant for it. This was an NSF grant. They wanted to study something called problem-based learning, where the group of students were given a problem, for instance, like a senator comes from Rome. This site is 20 miles outside of Rome, so after a day's journey, they're dusty, they're hungry, they want to take a bath, they need to eat. How do we greet and receive them? So they have to understand the villa structure, because there's places that certain class of people would go and others not, and so they would role play that. So they'd come in as avatars and role play those scenarios, and that was studied quite a bit, and several papers came out of that. So that was, to me, that was very exciting to work with that group, going through that process. And then the environment just really supported that. We've already talked about this. But this is a current project we're working on still. It's about 15 feet under modern Rome. Here's something that we also have in back. Here's an example of a augmented reality and locative app that aids in, these are very quick, sorry, but that aids in, again, visitor interpretation and understanding of a site. This is nearby the Adina Hopewell Mound site in Anderson. And Neil can show this next door here, and so you can see that when we're done. And this is up on the App Store, so you can, before you go to, next time you go to Mounds, you can grab it. And we accurately walked, I think with Kyle too, the trails, and so it's all, our trail map is really good, so you know. But anyway, you can check it out. And there's lots of overlays of, you know, the archaeologist surveys and other sorts of data and context that you just wouldn't normally get. And the other cool thing about this is that it uses a push technology. So once you launch the app, you don't necessarily have to fumble through user interface and menu experiences to get informed about what you're looking at. It just knows where you're at. It says, oh, you're at, you know, group B of these mounds, and here's what we have to say about that. And it was a nice kind of transparent, kind of magical kind of thing to do. So, and here's a current project. It's a previous incarnation of a current project, but it's something we're continuing to work on with Doug Seafelt and Jim Conley from the DSL. And the client is the Buffalo Bill Museum in Cody, Wyoming. And so we're creating different exhibit pieces that'll be permanently there now. This first prototype was a virtual world. We explored the instance of Buffalo Bill's traveling show as it was installed in Muncie, Indiana in particular. But it was a pretty just typical kind of instance of the traveling show. So that's an ongoing project, has lots of parts to it. Often on the getting away from keyboard mouse interactions, we look at new modes of interacting with information media technology. So this was a musical instrument that we built using the headset. One of the problems with wearing these headsets is you can't, unless you're super good with the keyboard, you really can't use the keyboard, and you certainly can't use the mouse for the most part. So you have to look at different modes of interaction. So here the innovation was we took, have you ever seen these Leap Motion little devices? They understand your hand tracking. Took one of those and clipped it to the front of the Oculus Rift. So you put your hands out here and it understands your hand skeleton, so we can map certain functions to finger movements and things like that. You theoretically could sign, you could do ASL, something like that. Here we built for a competition, we built a musical instrument. This is also working with Jim, Virtual Middletown, simulating the ball glass factory here in Muncie. This was a fun project for a lot of reasons. I mean, it's great to work with these guys, but this particular moment I thought was really exciting for us because we really played pretty hard about how you can interact with 3D objects in different ways. So sometimes you can pick them up and grab them, rotate them around, look at the mold markings. Other times maybe an audio file will pop up or a video file, or it hits the database, something like that. So we really explored lots of very rich modes of interaction. Here's another piece that grabs an archive, and again, using the 3D environment really as a portal to the archive. And again, this is back to Ball States Museum, and just leveraging their, they had this digitization project that they're continuing to work on in various forms, and we thought, wow, wouldn't it be great to use the museum itself as interface? So you go up to the painting, and that's your first experience with it, and from there you can drill down and get follow-up content. 28. Seen some of that. It's an architectural project. Saw that. Oh, we just saw. Okay, so we saw this one. Got out of sync there. Some projects involving healthcare, medicine, nursing. We do a lot with that. By the way, I should mention we're non-commercial. We're all nonprofit, but we do work almost exclusively on grants and contracts and that sort of thing on research projects or grants. Yeah. So this is this was for University of Washington? Eventually, I think it became So this is for a physician out at University of Washington that is a regular client of ours, and we do a lot of simulations with her and their training exercises. This one is really showing. You'll see in a second here. There's a dialogue tree, so you'll see there's decision points, and they have to go through the training. And usually they're learning. In this case, they're learning something called Team Steps, which is a national standard for collaboration between different types of disciplines. So it's a way to understand another unit's concerns and vocabulary and be sensitive to that. So sometimes in these, like here, she doesn't like the way the physician treated her. So how would they resolve this using this mode of conflict resolution, let's say. So that's what's sort of like a game. So you go through it, but so we do a lot of, like, this is pretty typical kind of simulation. But there's analytics for this, so all of the data from the clicks and the correct responses or incorrect responses, or what time of day they accessed it, or where they aggregated, like a heat map of where they aggregated. I mean, there's all sorts of data that can be collected from these kinds of experience, or where they struggled and quit the experience. Those kind of focus points. All of that can be collected and then put behind a password that an admin can grab. Here's a nursing simulator. We did this originally for Ball State, and we've since used it for other clients. And but I like this a lot because we emulated a lot of smart classroom technologies. So we just took things that we would have in a space like this and simulated them here too. So you can use them in very much the same way. So screens and PowerPoint and video and Dropbox even. You can have a folder on the wall where you can download a PDF that everybody can just grab it. Things like that. Play video, load YouTube video, URLs, things like that. And we worked with the organization that designed the food pyramid, the Academy of Dietetics and Nutrition, on a project similar to this. So this is, it's interesting to work on sort of inventing the classroom of the future in developing these teaching and learning tools. So I'll just kind of shuttle through this a bit, kind of see what he's doing. And then you can, since it is a virtual world, you can do things like just click on a door and boom, you're in a different space, essentially teleported. And here they use a different type of context for a home consultation. So we built a kitchen for them to make it feel like they were in that setting, or here they're in a private consultation space. And it gives them, again, this particular project was more based on role play, and so we supported that kind of activity. And then the last video here, just to give you some other kind of takes on things. This is something we'll show next door that Neil has ready for us. This is kind of fun. The museum currently has a diorama, which is a typical kind of white model sort of diorama, but it's not a particularly good one. And we're remaking this, and Adam has brought some of the pieces in today. We're 3D printing this, and this interpretation also was not very accurate. So we've accurately reinterpreted it and printing it out. But the cool thing, in my mind, is you can take something, again, dealing with visitor interpretation issues, and bring it to life with these devices, so through augmented reality. So we're really imagining this from the perspective of kids, kind of huddled around this white model, which is kind of meh, but then being able to look through their device, and then all of a sudden, the performers and the workers and the visitors and all that come to life, and there's dogs and campfires and people standing in line all moving around. This particular incarnation of the show was in Brooklyn. Cody was in Brooklyn for about half a year or so in 1894. And so that's what this simulates, is that he had a relatively permanent presence there after the Chicago's World Fair of 1893. He was over in Ambrose Park in Brooklyn. So that's what the diorama is dealing with. And working with scholars like Doug and Jeremy, who's the director of the museum, going through lots of photographic and archival kind of sets of information. We've reconstructed this because luckily there was photography, but not every part of the exhibit was photographed. So there's a lot of interpretation and kind of more typical guesswork that we have to work with as well in kind of arriving at these things. But luckily, in this case, there was a lot of photography. So we can maybe take a few questions out here if you like, and but I wanted to also let you know when we finish here, we have 6 stations set up next door, sort of science fair style, and you can come up and explore with these guys what they have brought today that are different, hands-on projects from the lab. So you can see some of this stuff firsthand, including, headsets and 3D printing, augmented reality. Help me out. What else do we have? Data visualization. Drones. So we use drones as platforms for certain types of data collection as well. What else do we have? Multi-user virtual world. Laser scanning. So all sorts of things. I didn't talk about laser scanning, but we do have a laser scanner here. But anyway, you can ask them to show you some of the current projects. So, but before we go in there, are there any questions about anything? Yeah.
I think one of the questions that comes up a lot, especially when we're talking about historic places or places that no longer sort of exist, is how to represent multiple interpretations or ambiguity in their interpretation. And maybe Dr. Jim could speak to this too, as you're working with scholars to represent these specific sites. How are you thinking about showing things like that kind of ambiguity or where source material comes from to sort of support a particular? And obviously this would vary depending on the context of where you're showing these to, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So in archaeology, there was this charter, they call it the London Charter, and they developed in a kind of an approach to dealing with that they call paradata, sort of like metadata, but basically it's leaving a breadcrumb trail of how you arrived at an interpretation and exposing that for the next person to come along so they can understand how you got there. Obviously a lot of what we do, there's big chunks that are missing, and so it is important to recognize what is actual or what is sort of a high level kind of informed interpretation and something that's just more guesswork. Like for instance, in the Ball glass factory, that was a site that kind of grew like Topsy, and I'm sure there was no architect, and the guys just probably built it, and things like that. So there was originally a portion of the building that we did have plans for, but sometimes it would burn down, and they would just sort of resurrected in a couple of weeks. And so there may have been photography from one year, but not from another. And so it was this pastiche of data, which was primarily photographic in that case. But yeah, right, it's important to leave that exposed. So, because the problem is, I think when you look at a virtual world, you think, oh, it must have been exactly like this. Well, it wasn't, of course. So we have that problem with Rome. I mean, Hadrian's Villa is a mess. If you go out there now, it's just, even though it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, it's everybody subsequent after Hadrian who wanted to build the villa came to Hadrian's Villa and took his marbles. So the only thing, there, really, there are some columns, of course, but I mean, pretty much it's just the red brick that was behind the marble. So how you arrive at a lot of this is, yeah, you have to. You have to leave that information for the next person. Yeah.
Talk about the visual vocabulary that we've considered to sort of distinguish between stuff that we have great confidence in and stuff that's speculative.
Yeah, right. So when we haven't done that, we want to do that with Middletown in particular, but right. So maybe stylistically something that is high confidence, like Jim said, might be photorealistically rendered, and as it gets less and less known, maybe it degrades digitally or something like that. Or maybe through rollover states you can kind of understand it's like A, B, or C kind of grade interpretation. Yeah, but it is a problem for sure. Now in terms of multiple narratives, I think that's one of the great things about this kind of technology is that you can support lots of voices. I mean, I know Doug and Jim and others work with a lot of that. For instance, this site, even though it's Roman, what we did is we found everybody's interpretation that was relatively a kind of a dominant interpretation of this sun calendar site, and we included it in our simulation. So we just kind of took all comers and we brought it into the single simulation. So some people believe that this sun calendar was what's called a meridian, which is just a north-south stripe. Other people believed it had a rosette form, so it was a circular form, and was more of a sun dial. And we just said, well, why not? We supported everybody's interpretation in this one simulation. And you could do that with other voices throughout history. Or, right now we're working on another Buffalo Bill project where there'll be 5 different narratives of the same experience. So from a little kid to Cody to one of the native performers, and so you get to see the show through their eyes. Same experience, but told from different lenses. Well, we can move next door, and these guys can probably just need a minute to get ready. And when we go over there, I'll introduce them briefly and tell you what they have for us today.